Hi, welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. Now, today I'm actually going to talk to you about looking through the different steps in due diligence for a property. So, how to actually essentially put the deal together. So, you might be thinking, look, people put their deal together. Some people need a lot of due diligence, some people need not a lot of due diligence, some people are just satisfied with the property. So, what I like to do is actually talk you through the process that I go through. So one of the processes that I go through is I look at three different areas. So I look at one area being compliance, one area being tenant, and one area actually being the property itself. So that's the three areas I look at research when I look at due diligence. So number one, when I look at compliance, I look at all the things that will make this property compliant. So if you are part of a strata property, and that could be office space or retail space or any of the spaces that requires a body corporate or retail. Now, if that's the case, then what I'm looking for is how are they compliant with it? So have they built a storage cage in one of their exclusive areas that has not been approved? Have they installed air conditioning that's not been approved? Have they installed a mezzanine floor that's not been approved by body corporate? Because they could all in the future impact you being able to sell or create more cost for when you actually need to take the premise apart and put a new tenant in there. Also, if it's a warehouse property and they've put in more office space, change the layout and the usage of it, that may mean that it's not being approved by council. So I look at the compliance. Is it if there is other structures being built, is it council compliant? Is it body corporate compliant? Have got all of those things ticked? Are they using professional tradesperson to do all of their work? So I check for those things. The other thing is I check regarding the actual property. So fire compliance. Is there fire compliance done? Asbestos done on the general property, whether it's strata or freestanding, whether there is a asbestos report being done, or whether there's no asbestos, so there's no need for it. Fire and your fire safety certificates and checks vary from state to state, but I always look for those. And also, I look at any of the other compliance issues. So, is it the zoning? Is that correct for what I want to do? So, what the tenant wants to do. So, what you want to do is you might want to be buying a warehouse property, and you realize that in the future, or the current tenant in there is actually spending more time as an office space than they are as a tenant that's storing. So that may be a problem when the council comes along. So you want to avoid those things. So you want to actually check it's compliant for use, and that in the future there's versatility for other tenants to come in and also use that premise as well. So those are the compliance issues that I try to cover off as well. So maybe I look at a building classification certificate. I look to make sure that there is insurance on the property and that it covers for things like flood, and sometimes depending if you're in North Queensland, you might cover for cyclones and things like that as well. So you've got to make sure different areas you'll cover for different areas. So maybe if you're in Victoria, it might be something like bushfire. So you've got to look at the different areas and check for the compliance in different areas. So that's number one. So number two, I look at the tenant. So what does that mean? It means I check out the tenant and how good they are, what their history is, and what they're likely to be like in the future, to the best of my guesstimate. Now, we don't have a crystal ball, but what we do have is we can do some due diligence to our best of guesstimates. We want to work out whether the tenant's going to stay. So we look at the tenant history, which is really important. We look at how long they've been there. We look at whether they've paid rent on time. We look at whether they've been invoiced for outgoings, if they need to pay for outgoings as part of the lease. We look at how well they've maintained the property, whether they've serviced the air conditioning, whether they've done their own fit out or whether you've done their fit out, how old is the fit out, whether it's been dated. We look at, and part of this is a lot of it during the inspection time, but a lot of it you can do due diligence by getting paperwork around, there's the air conditioning servicing, the tenant ledgers, the invoices, getting all the outgoings to make sure that you're checking to make sure the tenant has paid for those or the landlord has paid for that and they haven't had a significant rise over that period. But you can also do some research around your tenant by looking at their website. If you can, if they're a retail tenant or a tenant that you can utilize their services, use them as a client and see how they are. When you do the inspection, maybe have a chat to them or maybe have a chat to them afterwards about how they feel about their business, how it's tracking. Have a look how much staff they have a look at their history, have a look if they're busy, the traffic there. Sometimes it's worthwhile to just sit across the road and just gauge how they are. So that's the tenant due diligence. And then finally, number three, I look at the property itself. So if it's strata property, I want to make sure that the strata has maintained the property properly. the lifts are working. If it's a central ducted air conditioner, I want to make sure that's working properly. I want to make sure that, the car park is maintained. Any of the electronic doors, any of the remote access, all of those. I want to know that the waterproofing is done properly on the property. I want to make sure the property doesn't have any roof leaks. I want to make sure that there's no concrete cancer in the building. So I want to make sure I do the due diligence on the actual property. And now, if you have a freestanding property, you're going to have to do a pest and building as opposed to a strata search. So that's going to vary a little bit, but it's going to be, ultimately, you're looking at the building itself to see how much capital works is going to be there in the upcoming few years. Now, the ultimate prediction is to have nothing coming up that's going to cost you a huge amount of capital works or outlay from your own pocket in the next 2 years. Now, if there's minor things like, changing lights, fittings, or maybe even a repaint, or maybe there might be some special levies regarding, getting some safety things done in the building, these are not major things. But what you're looking for is, if there's a major roof leak, there's concrete cancer, there is safety hazards in there that's going to cost potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars that they have to raise a special levy. Or potentially when you take over, you might have to replace a roof for $50,000, or you might have to replace all the air conditioning units in the building for $20,000. These things are going to cost you in the future, and that's what you're trying to mitigate in your research when you're looking at doing the building research. And once you get ticked off all three of them, then you will be satisfied and you'll actually understand the property intimately from inside and out. Whether you've seen it or not, you start to understand everything about this property. And doesn't mean that all of your properties are going to come out and they're going to come out smoothly and wonderful and there's going to be no issues at all going forward. There's always going to be some issues, but it's about taking the good with the bad. Are you getting the right returns for this property? And does the minor cost stack up for, if you have another $3,000 or $5,000 coming through that you need to fix on the property in the next 1 or 2 years, is that still going to be worth it? So it's that balance of probability. So for some of my clients who are doing an uplift project or a development project, a $10,000 cost, they know that they're going to have to fix, or a returning wall they're going to have to fix, or they may have to replace the air conditioning unit. It's all part and parcel of the uplift they're going to get out of that property. If it's a set and forget property, most of my clients don't want to have a property that's going to create and give them that needs extra work afterwards. So you might want to go back to the vendor and renegotiate. So this is all part of a constant renegotiation process, but this is what I do through due diligence, and we delve down deep in each and every one of those segments. So if you need extra tips or helps, or you just want a personalized strategy, reach out to me, helentarrant.com, contact us, and look forward to sharing more tips about commercial property with you in the future. Bye for now.